may signify.
Welcome back. Let's dive right into our explainer on George G. Tuduzzi's classic Three Skeleton Key. Today, we're unpacking a story of survival and isolation that has literally haunted readers for decades. We're going to break down exactly how a simple lighthouse keeping job turns into an absolute claustrophobic fight for your life.
Just imagine it for a second. You're trapped on a tiny rock out in the ocean, knowing that you and your two coworkers are the only fresh meat for miles. That's the brutal core premise here. We've got three men, our narrator, a Breton named Leglio, and the head keeper, a Basque named Ichua. They're completely isolated, with their only refuge being this single, towering cylinder of granite and glass. And coming for them, an overwhelming, ravenous swarm of thousands upon thousands of starving rats.
Part 1. The Isolated Rock. So, this setting, located about 20 miles off the coast of Guyana, carries a deeply unsettling local legend. I mean, the name itself, Three Skeleton Key, comes from three escaped convicts who wrecked a stolen canoe right on this reef. They survived the sea, but slowly died of thirst. The story goes that their sun-bleached bones were picked clean by birds, leaving skeletons that would seemingly dance in the night's phosphorescent light. It's a chilling reminder that, hey, this rock is already a graveyard before our story even begins. And look at this scale of this place, 150 feet long by 40 feet wide. To put that into perspective, that is barely the size of a basketball court. Because the rock is treacherously smooth, one wrong step sends you sliding straight into the eternal patrol of massive sharks circling the base of the light. So yeah, there is literally nowhere to run.
Part 2. The ghost ship arrives. The keeper's monotonous everyday routine completely shatters on their ninth night. Out of nowhere, a Dutch-built three-master ship sails erratically right toward their reef. The men are understandably baffled. The ship is dodging and weaving around the island in this weird, unpredictable way. Leglio is convinced the crew is completely drunk or insane, but Ichua, being the veteran keeper, notices something far more disturbing. The ship is totally derelict, just wandering blindly with the wind and the currents.
Looking through their spyglass, they get a horrifying surprise. The ship isn't empty at all. It's been entirely overrun by a ravenous, writhing mass of rats. When the sun finally comes up, the men focus their binoculars, and the grim reality sets in. The crew hasn't abandoned the ship. The lifeboats are all still perfectly in place. The human crew is gone, because they were either driven into the sea or completely eaten alive by their own cargo.
Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that we are not dealing with your typical pests here. We aren't talking about those timid, skinny-tailed land rats that scatter the second you flip on a light switch. Oh no. These maritime rats are massive, hyper-intelligent apex scavengers. They're clannish, they're wise to the weather, and man, they are violently vengeful. If you harm just one of them, its sharp, piercing audio cry summons a horde that will strip the flesh right off your bones.
Just to put their ferocity into perspective, the source mentions a story about a Dutch captain who actually brought trained rat-hunting terriers aboard a ship. We're talking about dogs specifically bred and trained for fighting vicious rats. But stacked up against the sheer numbers and ferocity of these sea rats, the dogs were completely devoured in a single 24-hour period.
Part 3. The Rat Siege. The derelict ship violently impales itself on the sharp rocks and sinks instantly. But here's the kicker. The rats don't drown. They swim straight for the lighthouse. The men barely manage to slam the heavy doors and windows shut before the swarm hits. In seconds, the rats scale the entire 120-foot tower. Imagine the sound of that. Thousands of claws scraping against the glass, combined with this pestilential, nauseating odor. It instantly turns their safe haven into a suffocating, living tomb. Day by day, the tension mounts, and their stronghold literally begins to buckle under the pressure. On day 1, they try fighting back, hoping to blind and madden the rats with the powerful lantern beam. But by day 4, the rats have actually started eating away at the wooden window frames from the outside. The keepers desperately seal a sagging window with a sheet of tin, fully aware that the supply boat isn't scheduled to arrive for another 29 days. You know, when you're trapped in a dark, foul-smelling cylinder for days on end, human psychology does some really weird things. They watch the rats falling to the circling sharks, they try to count the endless swarm, and eventually, they even start recognizing individual rats. Naming the largest rat, Nero, is such a fascinating coping mechanism. It's an attempt to shrink this faceless, swirling mass of terror down into a single enemy they can actually understand. Part 4. Descent into madness.
By the 9th day, the suffocating stench and the incessant scratching audio from outside have pushed the men to the very edge of sanity. And then the absolute crisis hits. While the headkeeper Ichua dozes off around 2 a.m., the metal sheet sealing his window finally collapses. The starving swarm pours in. Ichua barely has time to leap to his feet and scream as the rats immediately cover his entire body. The barrier has officially failed.
What follows is an incredibly visceral, chaotic escape. The other two men rush into the room, slashing wildly with their knives just to pull Ichua free. They retreat, but the rats chew right through the heavy wooden doors. The men literally have to wade up the twisting lighthouse stairs, kicking through a knee-deep tide of rodents until they hurl themselves into the glass lantern room at the very top and bolt the heavy metal trapdoor behind them. Bleeding from innumerable bites and staring at the writhing curtain of rats pressing against the glass lantern, Lee Glio looks at his two wounded friends and completely loses his grip on reality. His crazed, maniacal laughter echoes in the small space as he hallucinates the grim local legend coming true. The narrator actually has to physically slap him across the face just to snap him out of it and silence the horrifying howling.
Realizing they couldn't reach the outside gallery to run up a distress signal, the men made an agonizing choice. They broke the most sacred rule of the lighthouse service and did not light the lantern. But, surprisingly, that desperate act of sabotage worked. Because they committed that ultimate sin of leaving the lighthouse unlit, a patrol boat finally arrives from the mainland at dawn to see what's wrong.
When the patrol boat arrives, the crew is just completely horrified to see the lighthouse covered in this seething, furry mass. The hyper-aggressive sea rats actually plunge into the water, attempting to board the rescue boat, but the ship's engineer brilliantly uses a high-pressure steam hose to scald the attacking column, repelling the boarding party and letting those patient, circling sharks clean up the rest of the mess.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to put yourself on that isolated, treacherous rock. The physical battle was horrifying, for sure, but it was the relentless psychological assault, the malevolent sights, the disgusting smells, the claustrophobia that truly broke these men down. Could you have kept your sanity while trapped inside a granite cylinder, listening to the audio sound of thousands of malevolent claws trying to dig their way in? It's a terrifying thought to leave you with. Thanks for joining me today. Keep exploring, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the shadows. We're going to dive into a complete, chilling deconstruction of W.F. Harvey's absolute masterpiece of Twilight terror, August Heat. So, settle in, because we're about to untangle a narrative that's going to make you question the very nature of reality. We're talking about those unseen, silent forces that might just be guiding our every single step. Okay, let's dive into this. It's kind of the ultimate philosophical mystery, isn't it? Like, do we actually control our own destiny? Or is the script of our lives already written in stone, literally just waiting to be acted out? Well, in this explainer, we'll see exactly how W.F. Harvey forces us to confront this exact dilemma. And he does it through a single, impossibly sweltering day in the life of a totally ordinary guy. But to really understand the unraveling of our main guy, James Clarence Wittencroft, we've got to first talk about the power of a premonition. You know that dark, nagging sense of impending doom in your gut? Now, Wittencroft is this independent 40-year-old artist. He's in perfect health. Actually, the guy has never known a day's illness in his life. But on this specific August day, a premonition begins to take a very physical, very terrifying shape. Now, to truly grasp the creeping horror of this story, we need to track the ticking clock of Wittencroft's day. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. We trace his steps from a totally mundane 9 a.m. breakfast to an intense bout of drawing at 4 p.m., through some seriously disoriented wandering in the early evening, right up to this agonizing wait in the dark hours just before midnight. We are literally watching a healthy, rational man unravel into absolute madness hour by agonizing hour. But there's a silent antagonist lurking in the background of this story, and that's the environment itself. The text says the room, though door and windows were open, was oppressively hot. This physical heat is a constant, stifling sensory detail. It's not just weather, it acts as a catalyst. It's this heavy, suffocating pressure that actually warps the mind, forcing Wittencroft to just pace indoors until sudden, completely unbidden inspiration strikes him. And man, does that inspiration strike. By 4 o'clock, he finishes a sketch of striking, eerie specificity. Without even knowing why, Wittencroft draws an enormously fat, bald man standing in the criminal dock, right after a judge has handed down a heavy sentence. The details are intense. The flesh hangs in rolls about his chin. But what makes it truly chilling isn't just how the guy looks, it's the emotion captured on the page. The subject's expression isn't horror. It's utter, absolute collapse. It's a portrait of a man entirely defeated by his fate. Let's move to the next phase and see how this builds. With that incredibly eerie sketch folded away in his pocket, Wittencroft just needs an escape. So he leaves his house. He starts walking. 5 or 6 miles just blur by as he loses his bearings, wandering aimlessly through this dusty asphalt landscape. And all the while, that almost palpable, heavy wave of heat just follows him. It pushes him further and further from home, right up until 20 minutes to 7. Suddenly, he snaps out of his daze. He finds himself standing in front of a monumental mason's yard. There's this stark wooden sign reading, C.H.S. Atkinson, worker in English and Italian marbles. It's such a jarring scene. You've got this thirsty earth dotted with purple stock and scarlet geraniums, but cutting right through that thick, oppressive heat is a cheery whistle and the sharp, cold sound of steel meeting stone. On a total impulse, Wittencroft just walks in. Now get ready for this encounter, because it is wild. Wittencroft steps into the yard and sees the stonemason with his back turned. The man turns around, and Wittencroft stops dead in his tracks. The mason is the exact same huge, elephantine man he drew just hours earlier. The bald head, the heavy features, everything. The stranger Wittencroft just randomly walked in on is the living, breathing embodiment of the doomed criminal currently sitting in his pocket. Only right now, he isn't in a state of absolute collapse. He's actually greeting Wittencroft with a warm, friendly smile, wiping the sweat from his scalp. The mason casually welcomes him in, chuckling and saying, "I don't know about the oasis, but it certainly is hot as hell. Take a seat, sir." Notice the terrifying irony here. Atkinson, a complete stranger wearing the face of a condemned man, casually invites Wittencroft to sit down on the very slab of stone he's working on. He is entirely unaware of the absolute terror that is currently freezing the artist's blood. And this brilliantly illustrates the horrifying symmetry between these two men. On one hand, you have Wittencroft's sketch, right? An artwork depicting Atkinson completely ruined in the criminal dock. But on the other hand, you have Atkinson's masterpiece. It's a slab of curiously veined marble, a flawless headstone he proudly claims is meant to be an exhibition piece. Think about it. You have two artists, completely unknown to each other, creating their finest work on the exact same sweltering day. But the true nightmare doesn't start until Atkinson steps back to show off his work. The inscription on the stone reads, "Sacred to the memory of James Clarence Wittencroft. Born Jan 18, 1860, he passed away very suddenly on August 20th. Let that sink in. Atkinson has carved Wittencroft's exact name, his exact birth date, and for the date of death, he has carved today's date. And right below those dates, the epitaph ends with a final chilling phrase. In the midst of life, we are in death. Seriously, talk about the ultimate bad day. Just imagine that for a second. Wittencroft is literally sitting on a tombstone that announces he is going to die today. The odds of this dual coincidence are just staggering. It's absolutely impossible to comprehend. When a visibly trembling Wittencroft asks where he got the name, Atkinson just casually replies that he didn't see it anywhere. He says he just put down the very first name and dates that came into his head, completely at random, which is exactly how Wittencroft thought he drew Atkinson's face, right? Entirely from his own imagination. And what makes this even more unsettling is that Atkinson casually remarks that only the day before yesterday, he was arguing that there were no such things as ghosts. I really want you to put yourself in Wittencroft's shoes for a second. If you were staring at your own freshly carved tombstone and it had today's date on it, what would you do? Would you run? Would you flee back out into the heat of the city, risking whatever unknown fate is waiting out there? Or would you stay with this strange, elephantine man, desperately trying to rationalize what is happening? Well, Wittencroft tells Atkinson his address, which happens to be an hour's walk away. And you've got to hear Atkinson's logic for making him stay. He speaks with this intense seriousness, warning that going home tonight means risking accidents. He says a cart might run him over, he might slip on a banana skin, or get hit by a fallen ladder. So Atkinson's big solution? Stay inside the mason's house, together, until midnight. Once the clock strikes 12, today's date will be over and the date carved on the stone will be wrong. It is ironically logical, sure, but it is terrifyingly misguided. He is convincing Wittencroft to lock himself inside a house with the very man he drew as a condemned criminal. So the crucial point is, the trap is set. We have officially reached the final phase. It is post 11 p.m. The wait. Every single minute stretches out as they sit in the darkness, both men just waiting for the safety of tomorrow. The picture Harvey paints of this final scene is intensely, incredibly claustrophobic. They're sitting in this long, low room beneath the eaves of the house. Atkinson's wife has been sent to bed. The air outside is heavily charged with the promise of a massive thunderstorm that simply refuses to break. Wickenfroft sits at a shaky table by an open window, hurriedly writing down the events of the day, desperately trying to anchor his mind to reality. And what is Atkinson doing during all this? He is busy sharpening his tools. He's smoking one of Wittencroft's cigars, hunched over a little oil stone. Because the table leg is cracked, Atkinson, being a handy guy, intends to mend it. But to do so, this huge man, the exact same man from the criminal dock, the man who just carved Wittencroft's death date, is sitting just feet away, methodically putting a razor-sharp edge on a steel chisel. The tension is absolutely unbearable. Wittencroft scribbles his final thoughts on the page. It is after 11 now. I shall be gone in less than an hour. The agonizingly slow passage of time ticks away, second by second, as midnight approaches. All you can hear is the sharp sound of steel scraping against the oil stone, echoing in the quiet room. And pressing down on all of this is that inescapable sensory nightmare, as Wittencroft notes, but the heat is stifling. The oppressive weight of that August heat has followed them from the sweltering streets directly into this tiny room. It has completely trapped them both in this tragic, claustrophobic loop. And then we reach the protagonist's final, chilling line of the entire narrative. It is enough to send a man mad. These are literally the last words Wittencroft writes. The climax hangs entirely ambiguously in the heavy, thundery air. We don't see the clock strike 12. We don't get to see what happens next. We are left only with the oppressive heat, a sharpened chisel, and a terrible, terrible prophecy. Which brings us to the final, terrifying question to leave you with today. Did Wittencroft's sketch predict a murder that was always destined to happen, or did Atkinson's logic, convincing Wittencroft to stay inside just to avoid a random accident, actually maneuver them into the exact circumstances that guaranteed one? I'll leave you to ponder those boundaries between coincidence, madness, and inescapable fate. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and until next time, keep questioning everything. All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a slightly different kind of explainer. We are going to deconstruct a total masterpiece of 1930s weird fiction. It's a genuinely chilling 1933 tale by Frank Belknap Long called Second Night Out. Now, I want you to just picture the setting for a second. You've got this quiet, fog-enshrouded ocean liner. The upper promenade deck is completely deserted. There's zero wind, just these thin wisps of fog kind of curling around the gleaming rails. Honestly, the only sound you hear is the heavy, sluggish movement of the ship churning through the water and the isolated, echoing footsteps of a lone male passenger. Today, we're going to break down the mechanics of this classic story. We'll look at how Long uses intense sensory details, isolated male voices, and just this masterclass in escalating dread to build what is essentially a perfectly tuned engine of terror. Okay, let's dive into this. It always comes aboard at midnight on the second night out. I mean, imagine hearing those exact words just stammered out in the dead of night. It's the sound of a male voice that's been totally stripped of all its normal maritime composure, just reduced to raw, primal fear. We're dropping right into the midnight terror of a cursed ocean liner here. But, to really get why this auditory shift hits so hard, we first got to look at the psychological state of our protagonist before the true horror even kicks in. Look at this stark contrast setting the stage for us. On the one hand, you have our protagonist's dreams. This guy isn't rich, right? He's basically drained his entire bank account for this tourist package. He's dreaming of the sun-drenched Malecón in Havana, sipping refrescos by moonlight, exploring these magical, colorful Caribbean harbors. But the reality? It is a gray, foggy nightmare. For 30 hours straight, he's been stuck in his cabin with a seasickness that he literally describes as worse than the bubonic plague. It's this profound, staggering physical misery that forces our exhausted guy out of his bed and up onto that deserted foggy deck way past midnight, just to catch a breath of fresh air. So he gets up there and he finds 3 wicker deck chairs that the steward inexplicably left out in the fog. Grateful, he just collapses into one. But
The second he presses his cheek against that damp wood, he's assaulted by something completely alien. It's this acrid, unwholesome odor that is just vehemently cloying. It's indescribably repellent, and it fills him with this sudden, almost frenzied hysteria. You guys, this isn't just a bad smell. It acts like a physical weight pushing him down, and it triggers something fundamentally cosmic and horrific.
Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. This isn't some simple fainting spell. The chair actually seems to act as a conduit, and the sane, familiar foundation of the world literally just drops right out from under him. He gets this overwhelming illusion that he's sinking helplessly through an eternity of space, just falling into these illimitable dark gulfs. He feels immersed in dark slime, somehow floating in both our standard three-dimensional world and some totally alien one at the same time. The very boundaries of his senses just dissolve. He feels the breath of an active corruption blowing right through him, and it's accompanied by these black, dead, shriveled shapes cavorting in the abyss. It's a total dissolution of reality. And within this void, he actually sees things. Now, our protagonist, he's a man of culture. He's totally familiar with the classic demon-seething infernos painted by Bosch or Goya or Cranach. But he tells us those classical paintings pale in comparison to this unclean vision. He sees grotesque, monkey-like heads with streaming, sea-drenched viscera and putrid, pupilless eyes. It's this flickering visual sequence that is so ghastly, so completely unnerving, that it shakes him to his very core. He leaps up from the chair, the vision fades, but that terrible odor? Yeah, that remains. So terrified, he stumbles inside to the steamy upper saloon. He is desperate to find the deck steward. He wants a rational explanation for those chairs, right? The steward, who's a daytime official, gets fetched from his berth. At first, the guy's perfectly courteous. We hear his polite male voice asking what he can do to help. But the moment our protagonist mentions those 3 chairs on the deck, the steward's demeanor completely shatters. All the blood just drains right out of his face. His mouth falls open, he nearly collapses, and then, with a voice totally devoid of its former professional polish, he just gasps, "You saw chairs?" Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how the steward frantically maps out the exact terrifying schedule of this supernatural entity based on the previous voyage. He confesses to our protagonist that a black, dead thing with a shriveled monkey face visits the ship every single voyage on the second night out. It comes aboard right at midnight. It knows exactly where the chairs are, drags them out on deck, and sits in them, leaving them coated in this stinking black slime. On the last voyage, the steward actually saw it. He ran away, but at 12:40 a.m., he saw its wet, dripping face pressed right against the saloon window. And then, just 10 minutes later, that's when the real auditory horror kicked off. The steward recounts this absolute auditory nightmare. He describes the agonizing shrieks of a male passenger, a Dr. Blodgett, just echoing through the ship at 10 minutes to 1. The grim reality here is super visceral. The entity didn't just haunt Dr. Blodgett, it clawed him to death. It crushed his face to a pulp, tore off his legs, and absolutely drenched the berth curtains in blood. And honestly, the most disturbing part of the whole shebang, the creature stole the dead man's clothes. At this point, our narrator is barely clinging to his sanity. He says his brain feels like it's being physically pressed upon. The steward, who's terrified but still compassionate, physically helps our stumbling protagonist down the central stairway. He's murmuring these quiet reassurances, guiding him back to his cabin, stateroom 16D. The protagonist just wants to be left alone so he can lie down. He dismisses the steward, shoves the door shut with whatever weight he has left, and hears the lock click. But, in his exhausted state, he drops his room key. So the room is pitch black. The protagonist gets down on his knees, on the soft carpet, literally groveling in the dark, frantically sweeping his hands back and forth trying to find that dropped key. The heavy silence in this dark room is just suffocating. It's this wild contrast to the loud thumping of his own heart. He's cursing under his breath. And then, in the absolute darkness, his sweeping hand brushes against something on the floor, something fibrous and hard. His fingers frantically trace over it to figure out what it is. It's a shoe, just standing there, firmly planted on the floor of his locked stateroom. And sprouting from it, right beneath a sock, is the flesh of an ankle, flesh that is very, very cold. In an instant, man, all that exhaustion vanishes. It's instantly replaced by this pure, caged animal adrenaline. He leaps to his feet, scrambling around the narrow, pitch-black room, desperately slapping at the walls, trying to find the electric light switch. He finally smacks the button. The lights blaze on, and he sees the intruder. But strangely enough, the sight actually brings this false sense of overwhelming relief. Sitting upright on the couch is a stout, well-dressed gentleman holding a grip, looking completely composed. The guy's face is covered by a large handkerchief, which our narrator figures is just to block the chilly air coming from the porthole. He assumes it's just some fellow passenger who wandered into the wrong room and fell into a deep sleep. So he politely taps the man on the shoulder, whispering this hoarse little apology, fully expecting a polite male response, but he is met with deafening silence. The man doesn't wake up. He doesn't budge. He doesn't even disturb the handkerchief with his breathing. That total lack of sound, the absolute absence of breath, it triggers a massive resurgence of our protagonist's alarm. The relief completely evaporates. Trembling, he reaches out his hand and seizes a corner of that handkerchief. He just has to know, is there a composed human face beneath it? With a gasp of pure fright, he tears the cloth completely away. And this is what is revealed under the harsh lights of Stateroom 16D. The black, dead thing. A dark, repulsive visage with corpse-white, viscid, malignant eyes. It's got this flat, simian nose, hairy ears, and a thick, black tongue that literally seems to leap up out of its mouth at him. The creature's head shifts, kind of wriggling and squirming in this revolting way, revealing a profile that's somehow even more bestial and gangrenous than the front. The protagonist shrinks back against the door, agonizing at a totally brutish level of consciousness, pretty much driven mad by the sight. But then, right before his eyes, this hideous process kicks off. First, that horrific black tongue snaps back into the mouth. Second, the hard lines of its bestial features start to shrivel and soften up. Third, these thin little streams of blood start trickling down from those sightless corpse-white eyes. And finally, the mouth widens into a red slit, and the entire face just dissolves into an amorphous crimson flood. The horror literally melts down into a puddle of blood, soaking right into the clothes it was wearing. Our narrator? Yeah, he completely blacks out. And this brilliantly illustrates the dark twist we get the next day. The steward basically has to force brandy through the narrator's teeth just to wake him up. He tells him he had to burn those blood-drenched clothes that were left on the couch. Why? Because they were the exact clothes stolen from the mangled body of Dr. Bludgett on the previous voyage. The monster had been sitting right there in our protagonist's cabin, masquerading as a gentleman, wearing a dead man's suit. So, why didn't our narrator suffer the exact same fate as Dr. Blodgett? Well, it really comes down to the creature's supernatural mechanics versus sheer dumb luck. Because the narrator's horrific seasickness kept him up on the deck in those wicker chairs, the creature ended up waiting in the cabin for way too long. It either fell asleep or just couldn't get back out in time before the ship passed out of its designated supernatural zone. And that is what caused its physical form to violently dissolve. But listen, survival does not always mean salvation. This cosmic encounter fundamentally shatters the protagonist. Those colorful, sun-drenched dreams we talked about at the beginning of this explainer, gone. Havana completely failed to restore him. The magical ports of Haiti just turned into a black horror of alien desolation and menacing shadows. And by the time he finally reached Martinique, a single hour of undisturbed sleep in his hotel room was flat out impossible. It really forces us to realize that true horror is something you can never unexperience, right? The psychological damage here was permanent. And that brings us to the steward's final, chilling observation. The steward was absolutely certain that the blood on the curtains meant the creature wasn't gone for good. It would absolutely return on the next voyage. And he looks at our narrator and says, "I'm glad you rang for me. If you'd gone right down to your stateroom, it might be wearing your clothes next voyage." It really forces us to ask, out there in the vast, dark, fog-enshrouded ocean, just how many empty suits are waiting to be filled. Thank you so much for exploring the mechanics of terror with us today. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and we'll see you in the next explainer.
Welcome to the Explainer. Today, oh man, do we have an incredibly gripping narrative to unpack. We are dissecting Samuel Blaz's suspense masterpiece, a brilliant little short story titled Revenge. Now, this isn't just your run-of-the-mill thriller. It is a literal masterclass in psychological tension, narrative misdirection, and honestly, the terrifying fragility of the human mind. If you love discovering exactly how a writer manipulates your expectations to deliver a truly devastating twist, you are in for an absolute treat today. Let's uncover exactly how Blas constructs this trap, piece by piece, and what it reveals about the dark corners of our own psychology. Okay, let's dive right into this. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the plot, we really have to acknowledge this story's legendary footprint in pop culture. Revenge wasn't just a successful story. It actually served as the blueprint for mid-century on-screen suspense. In fact, it was adapted for the absolute first premiere episode of the iconic TV series Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And the idea spread like wildfire from there. The core plot was replicated in a bunch of classic horror comics, titles like Witches' Tales, The Tormented, and crime suspense stories. But you might be wondering, why did the master of suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock, choose this specific narrative for his massive television debut? Well, it's because it perfectly encapsulated his all-time favorite theme, the bomb under the table. Hitchcock absolutely loved taking domestic, suburban bliss and just invading it with sudden, banal terror. This story doesn't rely on literal monsters. It relies on the terrifying unpredictability of ordinary people. And Hitchcock knew that concept would deeply, deeply unsettle a 1950s audience.
Just listen to how Blas sets the scene. Twilight is settling in the valley. The motor sound grows louder in the thin air, within the enclosing silence. Reading that, you can almost feel the cool mountain breeze on your skin, right? The author immediately builds this cinematic, deeply isolated mood. It's warm, it's serene, it's quiet. But as we know, in a suspense story, isolation is never just a pretty setting. It's a psychological lullaby. By lulling us into this beautiful enclosing silence, Blas is perfectly priming our senses. He's creating a deliberate misdirection designed to make the coming violence hit us twice as hard.
So picture this idyllic setup. You've got a newlywed couple finishing out their honeymoon in an isolated mountain trailer camp. The husband takes a half-day grocery trip to a nearby town, leaving his wife, Elsa, behind to prepare this promised surprise dinner. It sounds perfect, right? But right in the middle of this romantic, peaceful setup, Blas drops a massive, incredibly deliberate red herring. A newspaper headline reporting an escaped convict hiding in the nearby woods. As a reader, your anxiety immediately spikes. You're entirely certain you know exactly where this is going, and the author expertly uses that assumption against you. He's manipulating your anticipation of where the threat is actually going to come from.
But then, the pacing completely shifts when the husband returns. Minute 1, he pulls up expecting this warm, loving welcome, but instead, he sees wisps of smoke slipping through the unlatched trailer door. Minute 2, he rushes in. There's no fire, but there's this acrid fog. He finds the dinner, 3 shriveled chops and a ruined, crumbling cake just burning on the stove. Minute 3, the silence sets in, broken only by a faint, weak, rising and falling breath coming from behind the bed curtain. And minute 4, the horrifying discovery. He finds Elsa, completely naked, pale, and covered in these cruel bruises where heavy fists had struck her. In just a few breathless moments on the page, that perfect honeymoon is violently, irreversibly destroyed.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is the profound psychological break Elsa endures. Look at the contrast here. Before the grocery trip, Elsa radiates this slender, glowing warmth. She has this shy, secret smile and a soft, rich laughter. But afterward, that warmth is entirely gone. She speaks in this flat, hollow voice that actually frightens her husband. She is possessed by an unearthly, curious calm, constantly staring straight ahead into the distance, almost as if she's locked in a trance, looking at a menacing figure that only she can see. This isn't just physical shock. Severe trauma literally rewires the brain's perception of reality, plunging her into a total, shattering psychological break. And the true depth of that break is captured in just a single, haunting phrase. As her husband holds her, desperately trying to comfort her and bring her back, she stops crying. She stops shivering. Instead, she just repeats, "He killed me. He killed me." She says it over and over again until her husband has to physically shake her just to make her stop. In her traumatized mind, her previous life, her safety, her very concept of self, it has all been entirely extinguished.
And then, we get the revelation of who actually did this. As the husband frantically questions her, the story brilliantly subverts all of our expectations. Remember that newspaper headline, "The Escaped Convict in the Woods"? Yeah, toss that right out the window. The attacker wasn't some sensationalized monster hiding in the trees. It was an ordinary man, a salesman carrying a display case, who knocked on the door, smiled, edged his way inside while chattering about kitchenware, and then violently assaulted her. This right here is exactly why Hitchcock adapted this story. The author teaches us that the real threat isn't the obvious criminal. It's the banality of evil standing right on your front porch with a friendly smile.
It completely violates our deepest sense of safety in our own homes. This horrifying revelation triggers a complete psychological shift in the husband, which introduces our core theme here: vigilantism. He decides to completely bypass the police to take the law into his own hands. Actually, he notes that the thought of calling the cops never even crossed his mind. Not once. His protective, tender love for his wife instantly curdles into this blinding, cold, calculated rage. He is consumed by only one impulse: a dreadful, agonizing craving for revenge. And this really exposes the supreme danger of this mindset, how righteous anger can completely blind your logic and reason, setting up the absolute tragedy to come. He vows to hunt this ordinary salesman down and kill him. But to do that, he needs Elsa to help him identify the man.
So the crucial point is, they drive down from the mountain into the sleepy neighboring town. They're prowling the streets, scanning literally every passerby until the moment of identification occurs. After about half an hour of driving, Elsa suddenly grips her husband's arm. Her face goes pale, her lips fall open, and she points at a man locking the door of a shabby car near the local hotel. "That's him," she whispers. The husband asks her if she's absolutely sure. She watches the man walk toward the hotel and insists, "That's him. That's him." For the husband, this is all the judge and jury he needs. But for us watching, it highlights just how incredibly fragile and dangerous eyewitness testimony can be, especially from someone locked in deep, untreated shock. What follows is honestly terrifyingly calculated. The husband tells Elsa to just wait in the car. First, he saunters into the hotel lobby, blending in perfectly, just a few steps behind his target. Next, seeing the room number on the man's key, he avoids suspicion by riding the elevator to the floor right above the target's room. He walks quietly down the stairs, creeps through the carpeted hallway, and knocks softly on the door, pretending to be a local buyer. Finally, when the man opens the door with a welcoming grin, the husband pulls a hammer from his waistband and smashes it mightily into the back of the man's head, killing him instantly with a single avenging blow. And this brilliantly illustrates a dark, dramatic irony. Looking down at the crumbled, lifeless figure on the floor, his fury just vanishes. He wipes the doorknob with his handkerchief, steps out into the quiet hallway, and his internal monologue reveals something chilling. "I at last felt clean, free of obsessing shame." He doesn't feel guilt. He doesn't feel horror. He feels victorious and totally justified. He thinks he's reclaimed his honor and protected his wife. But the reality is that in his blind pursuit of justice, the husband has now become the very monster he sought to destroy, completely devoid of empathy. He walks casually out of the sleepy hotel, gets back into the car with Elsa, and simply tells her, "It's done." Let's move to how this builds to the climax. Believing justice is fully served, the husband desperately tries to project this false sense of safety. They hook up the trailer and flee the area, driving furiously toward the bustling city at the foot of the mountain. He hopes the busy city streets are going to provide a distraction from their lonely, bloody secret. He promises Elsa a hot bath, a hotel room dinner, a nice bottle of wine, and most importantly, a good night's sleep away from the horror. He truly believes the nightmare is finally over, completely unaware that it has actually just begun. Because as they merge into the heavy city traffic, the husband points out a nice hotel they are approaching and asks Elsa if she would like to stay there. Her glance follows his pointing finger. And then, the ultimate devastating twist drops. She goes pale again. She grips his arm tightly. She stares straight ahead into the busy street, points at a completely different man walking on the sidewalk, and whispers those exact same hollow words. "That's him. That's him." The horrifying truth just crashes down on the husband. Her traumatized mind is broken. She is projecting her profound terror onto the world, and she is going to see her attacker and every single man she meets for the rest of her life. Which brings us to a deeply, deeply unsettling reality. Think about it. Who did the husband actually kill in that hotel room? He bypassed the law, acting purely on the word of a deeply traumatized victim, and bludgeoned a completely innocent man to death. The narrative trap has snapped shut. He is now a murderer, completely unprotected, trapped in a waking nightmare of his own making, alongside a wife whose psychological wounds he can never, ever heal. It leaves us with an incredibly provocative question to chew on. What happens when our drive for justice is fueled by a broken mind? Think about that devastating ending for a bit, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.
Okay, let's just jump right into this explainer of Richard Connell's 1928 masterpiece of suspense, The Most Dangerous Game. We're going to look really closely at what happens when sight is completely stripped away, and our protagonist, and frankly us as the audience, is forced to rely entirely on the terrifying absence and presence of sound. All of this while navigating a deeply unsettling clash of extreme masculine egos. Right off the bat, we're plunged into this intensely dreadful sensory atmosphere. Picture it. We're on a yacht in the Caribbean, and it is a night so pitch black you literally can't see 4 yards ahead of you. It's described as moist black velvet. And then Whitney introduces this incredibly chilling idea that evil actually has tangible wavelengths, just like sound and light. So in a world completely swallowed by the dark, sound basically becomes our primary vehicle for fear. Part 1. The philosophy of the hunt. So before the actual terror kicks in, we absolutely have to understand our protagonist, singer Rainsford. He's up on the yacht chatting and displaying just a total lack of empathy. In his own mind, Rainsford is the ultimate male dominator, right? The absolute apex predator. He literally laughs off the idea that animals feel fear. To him, the world is strictly divided into 2 categories, the hunters and the huntees, period. He completely dismisses the emotional and, frankly, the auditory reality of his prey. Part 2. Sounds in the void. Then, bam. Suddenly, Rainsford is plunged into the blood-warm waters of the Caribbean Sea. The yacht just vanishes into the night, taking every single source of light with it. Totally stripped of his sight, his survival now relies 100% on auditory cues. First, there are 3 distant gunshots piercing the dark. He swims blindly toward them. The boat's engine fades away. Then, an animal scream. And finally, a crisp, staccato pistol shot, which pulls him toward the muttering sound of the sea crashing on a rocky shore. Now, the most vital and honestly the most terrifying sound he hears during that desperate swim is that high screaming sound. It's described as an animal in an extremity of anguish and terror. But here's the catch. Rainsford, this world-renowned expert hunter, does not recognize it. It's completely alien to him. This specific audio cue shatters his status as the all-knowing apex predator. For the very first time, he's forced to confront the visceral, inescapable reality of fear. When he wakes up on the jungle edge the next afternoon, Rainsford starts reading the scene like it's forensic evidence. He finds crushed weeds, a crimson stain, and, really startlingly, an empty .22 caliber cartridge. His masculine logic immediately kicks in here. He deduces that whatever fought here was huge, but the hunter used a very light gun. And, well, where there are pistol shots, there are men, and where there are men, there's food. So he follows the boot prints. Part 3. The Chateau's Silent Giant. Following those prints, Rainsford stumbles upon this massive palatial chateau hidden right in the jungle. And here, he comes face to face with 2 extremely chilling, diametrically opposed male figures. First up is Ivan. He's a gigantic, black-bearded Cossack armed with a revolver. But notice the audio component here, or rather, the lack of it. Ivan is completely deaf and dumb. His threat is massive, it's physical, and it is absolutely silent. Then, General Zaroff descends the stairs. He's slender, aristocratic, and speaks in this highly precise, cultivated voice. So you have Ivan representing silent, brutal force, while Zaroff embodies vocal, calculated, psychological dominance. Zaroff actually welcomes Rainsford pretty warmly. But as they sit down in this medieval-style dining hall eating borscht, Zaroff reveals his singular obsession. He says, "I have but one passion in my life, Mr. Rainsford, and it is the hunt." This line right here sets the stage for a horrifying ideological clash between 2 men who have literally defined their entire existences by the trigger of a rifle. Part 4. General Zaroff's deadly boredom. To really grasp the horror of Ship Trap Island, we have to look at the timeline that shaped Zaroff into this ultimate predator. We're talking about a guy who was given a custom gun at age 5, killed his first bear at 10, and eventually commanded a division of Cossack cavalry. His entire male identity is built squarely on military prowess and conquering nature through violence. But after hunting every beast globally, he hit a psychological wall. Zaroff explains that because of his intensely analytical mind, the hunt basically ceased to be a sporting proposition. It just became a mathematical certainty. He got his quarry every single time. The perfection just became a total bore to him. The core issue for Zaroff? Animals only have legs and instinct, and as he so coldly points out to Rainsford, instinct is simply no match for reason. Part 5. Inventing a new prey. Faced with losing the one and only thrill in his life, Zaroff's hyper-analytical mind arrived at a deeply, deeply sinister conclusion. Over a glass of port, with the perfectly calm, cultivated voice of a cosmopolite, Zaroff drops this chilling admission. I had to invent a new animal to hunt. I mean, just imagine the dreadful silence in that room. Rainsford, the guy who just claimed he didn't care how a hunted creature felt, is now sitting across from a man who has taken that exact same masculine philosophy to its absolute most monstrous extreme.
Zaroff goes on to outline his master plan. Using his vast wealth, he literally bought Ship Trap Island and purposefully engineered its jungles, hills, and swamps specifically to supply him with this unparalleled thrill. He created an environment totally isolated from the rest of the world, a place where he alone controls the game, the rules, and the ultimate fate of his prey.
We've seen exactly how Zaroff used the hunt as this ultimate battle of intellect. He needs a quarry that can strategize, right? Something that can hear the snap of a twig and actually understand what it means. Something that can feel the very audio frequency of fear Whitney warned us about at the beginning. If instinct is no match for reason, what is the only animal on Earth that possesses the power of reason? I'm going to leave you to think on that horrifying realization, a reality which forces Rainsford to directly confront the monstrous extreme of his own worldview all alone in the deadly silence of the jungle.
Do not come any closer.
There is no escape.